Hi, you are joining an open dialogue. I'm Violet Howe.
And I'm Tawdra Kandle. And that was a new beginning. You are joining an open dialogue. I like that actually.
Well, because I normally say you're listening to an open dialogue, but if they're watching on YouTube, then they're
That's true.
watching. And
They could be
so,
watching.
just at this last spur of the moment creativity, I thought of the word joining because that would
I like
cover either
that.
one.
No, I like that. And besides an open dialogue, our dialogue tend to be ongoing as well as
Yeah,
open. So you're just joining it. It's like we've been
you're
having a
joining.
conversation. You wandered over to us at a cocktail party, and then you go, "Oh my gosh, what have I gotten into?"
Yes, exactly.
But now
You
you're
joined
stuck.
the conversation and immediately were like, how do I walk away from this No, I'm
But you
kidding.
can't because you're stuck.
No, you
I
can't.
want to say, since we talked about seeing us, I want to point out that this is our first podcast with both of us in
In our new places.
new
Yeah.
digs. Yes, we were going to talk about moving. I guess that will be a future.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think we need to kind of like recover from it
we
a
do.
little more before it's kind of like child labor. Like you have to get a little bit
Wait,
past
no,
it
no,
before
no,
you can
not
comfortably
not child
discuss it.
labor, sweetie. Childbirth. Child labor is a whole other.
True. True. Childbirth. Well,
Childbirth. We will
I mean,
not be
that's
discussing
labor.
child labor.
That's
Yes, we
labor.
will not be
No.
discussing that. That is not a topic
No,
for us.
nor is there ever a time when you should get
Yes.
far enough past child labor to think it's okay. Childbirth,
Yeah.
going
Childbirth.
into labor and having childbirth. Like you have to
True.
get a little bit
True.
past it until you're comfortable
That's
discussing it.
that's true. Although I believe both of us did use child labor in our moves, so there
Yes.
we go.
Yes, we
Although
did.
since we don't have actual children, we have offspring who are now adults. We can no longer
Yeah.
term it that.
Which, can I just say that the more adult they become, the more useful they are in a move because they have their own
True.
vehicles and they have
True.
more
True.
muscles and yeah,
Although it is also harder to get their
work around their
time and
schedules.
attention, right? Because they have
Yes.
lives. They had lives, that
Yes.
they think they have the audacity to think are more important than or as important. All right, but we are not talking about moving today. That is a topic. That is a
For
coming
another
attraction
day.
topic. Yes,
Yes.
another day. But actually, we should have done when we were in the middle of boxes and both of us on the edge of insanity. But we
Sure.
didn't. Nobody's going to get to see that. So
We might have
anyway,
been in tears.
we might have been, but we got to be together for like a week,
We did. And we had all these
almost a week.
grand, wonderful plans that, oh, while we're together for a week, we'll record a podcast live
Right?
together in the
No.
same room. And
Well, yeah, you
it
said
didn't
it.
happen.
I brought my earphones, my headset, but I was like, yeah, I don't think. I mean, it might have. What we
We
should
couldn't even
do?
do a TikTok
No,
video,
we
which
could.
is 3 minutes. So, yeah, there was no hope that we were actually going to record a podcast.
We should what we should do one of these nights, and maybe if we plan it ahead of time long enough, we should do a open dialogue after dark where we record one of our
There you go.
late nights. We come back. We were in St. Pete Beach at the Novelist Inc. conference, and we were suite mates, and
Which this is
Violet.
our third
Oh,
year, fourth year being suite
fourth,
mates.
fourth, I think
I
fourth.
think
Yeah,
fourth.
I think so. Um, but at any rate, we would come back from our various sessions and compare notes and talk about what we had heard and said and done. And anyway, so
Our
that would
late
be
night conversations
that's true.
go everywhere. Like it's
They do.
amazing what all we discuss
Yes,
in
yes.
those
You
wee
you
hours of delirium.
told me a story that I was sure was going to give me nightmares. So yeah, I hear these things.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
which
was a true crime story.
yeah,
We
that
should
was a
do a
true
true
crime.
crime episode sometime and
We
discuss that
should.
story.
Have you watched Only Murders in the Building?
No, but I really want to. That's the one with
Oh,
Steve Martin, Martin
and
Short,
Martin
and
Short,
Selena
Selena,
Gomez, right?
and Sting, and Nathan
Yeah.
Lane, and a
Every
bunch of other
time
people.
because
So good.
we've been watching Nine Perfect Strangers on
Mm,
Hulu with Nicole Kidman, and
right.
every time we go on, like the preview before that is Only Murders in the Building, and I'm always like,
Yeah,
oh, I really want to
it
watch that.
is. It is. It's super good. It's super good. I've branched out over the last little bit and been watching some different things. But anyway, one of the things that we talked about that was kind of a discussion at NINC
Hmm.
was culture and art and where we are. And so this was your suggestion. So how about you
Well,
bring us around?
we were talking about a conversation originated not between us at
No.
NINC about changing culture and
Mm-hmm.
changing arts
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like the state of art today.
Mm-hmm.
And in the midst of that discussion, I kind of brought up in a previous chapter of this life, I was a middle school teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
I taught history, and I was fascinated as I was teaching um, a segment on ancient Rome and the decline of ancient Rome, and I became fascinated with the many ways that our civilization kind of mirrors theirs in decline, which is which is like both scary and kind of like eye opening.
Yeah.
But if any of you are interested in kind of delving more into that, we're going to concentrate on the arts today. But if you delve more into that and you look at like some of the main causes for Rome falling, and they had issues with their military, they had issues with politics, they had issues with corruption, they had issues with how they were treating the poor, they had issues with how they were maintaining their infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Any of this sound familiar? They
Mm-hmm.
had issues with art and culture, and it's a fascinating read to kind of look at the number of ways that we parallel them. Now, I'm not saying that
Mm-hmm.
that means that we're destined for a fall, but there was a quote that I found that you and I had discussed. Being blindsided in slow motion is the hardest fate to avoid, and that was
Mm-hmm.
a quote by Cullen Murphy from the
Yeah.
Atlantic, who writes quite extensively about this comparison. And I think it's something for us to be aware of. Like, I think,
Yeah.
we always talk about it's important to learn history to prevent history from repeating itself.
Right.
And I definitely think this is one that we should pay attention to, or that we should look at, because there's so many parallels with civilization. So I'll go ahead and throw in that other quote so that I don't forget. This one's a John Steinbeck quote.
Hmm.
And I found this quote because at the end of the American Adventure at Epcot, Mark Twain quotes
Mhm.
John Steinbeck as saying, "We now face the danger which in the past has been the most destructive to the humans: success, plenty, comfort, and ever increasing leisure. No dynamic people has ever survived these dangers." And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I do think that once you reach a certain level of success or a certain level of comfort, you're no longer hungry for it,
Yeah.
and you're no longer fighting for it. And you just kind of become complacent and take it for granted. And I do think that we see that a lot in art and culture. Um,
Right.
just in things like and when I say this, I'm not saying any particular type of music. I think any genre of music, or any genre of writing, or of media, um, like multimedia, I should say, like films, things like that, they all
Mhm.
have their own merit, and they all have their own value, and they're all art. But when we start seeing that we spend a lot of time repeating or remaking or pulling from the past, and less
Right.
time creating original, or when you see artists who, I think there are some artists who are, a large part of their music is like, I don't want to jump on like the auto tune bandwagon, but like when you see things that we're starting to become complacent, or we're starting to become comfortable with just using what's already here, and not being
Right.
innovative, and not being moving forward, and not being original, and being not relying so much on creativity and imagination, just kind
Right.
of doing what works over and over again. Like, we see this in movies, where we
Mhm.
just remake. If a movie was a success, then we either remake it, or we continue to put out sequels to it until we've
Mhm.
beaten it to death and taken every bit of life from it. Or we see this in songs, where we remake them over and over again. And sometimes it's something that's really cool and really clever, and it is definitely a different angle that brings something new to the material. Sometimes it's just tired, and it's a
Right.
reach.
Yeah, and it's
And
not always. We're not the proverbial old man, old woman on the porch shaking our fists and saying,
These young
young
folks.
people these days, they can't and listen to that dang rock and roll music. And no, that's not what we're saying. And like you said, there are remakes and repeats that can be well done. I was my granddaughter is very into music, and when I say that, she's almost 3, so I mean she's not like building a library of music, but she knows what she likes, and she likes a Neil Sedaka song that's "Breaking Up Is Hard to Do," and she's heard the
Hmm.
fast version, and I said, "Oh, did you know that he also recorded a slow
A
version?"
slow
And
version.
I remember that growing up, being like, "Wow, why would you do that?" And it's an interesting artistic choice, but it made sense. He had a rationale behind it, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about almost a laziness. Would you term it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I definitely think there's ways to remake things where you breathe new life into it.
Hmm.
You see a whole different angle that can be pursued, or you see a
Right.
way of flushing it out or peeling back another layer of it. And I
Right.
definitely think that can work and that could be innovative and creative. But I do think what we're talking about is when we kind of get lazy and we just try to either rely on what worked before or rely on what's already working rather than taking the risk on something new.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Definitely. Definitely. And I mean, there are we can look around and see that there is a difference between recycling and using something as a jumping off point. Um,
right,
I think of, I mean, an obvious example in literature was uh, Twilight had changed to 50 Shades of Grey. That
right,
was the inspiration there, and
right.
and
But she used
she's seen a
that
little
as
success with that,
inspiration.
right?
Yeah, a
Yeah,
little bit. She was
a little
successful with it.
success.
But
Yeah,
but I
she
think
will.
that's one where she used it for inspiration, but she didn't copy it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Because there are
Yeah.
some people
Mm-hmm.
who, unless they were told that it was a Twilight, it started as Twilight fan
Right.
fiction, they would never know there was a connection to Twilight. Um,
Exactly. Yeah,
so
especially if they'd never read it. And there is certainly a movement where we're seeing retelling of fairy tales, which can also
yeah,
be really kind of innovative, and it can be a great way to reframe a story or to take
right.
a story and do that. Um, but I
Actually
think
was
that, yeah.
just told last night, someone recommended. I had we do a monthly chat in my ultraviolets reader group, and someone last night, Delorianne from Coastal Magic Reading Challenge, she recommended a book that's a retelling of Alice in Wonderland. And
Oh,
I can't remember the title, but I wrote it down, so
okay.
I'll
You'll
get it
put it
and
in
put
our
it in the
show
comment
notes.
section
Yeah,
whenever we, yeah.
yeah.
um but yeah, so I do think that can be done very well, because again, if you're coming up with a different angle, if you're coming up with a way, modernizing, or you're looking at a different way of doing it. Like I look at A Star's Born, which is a
Mm.
franchise that is now seen, well, not a franchise, but it's a story that has now seen what,
I know
four
of three.
incarnations
I
of
know of
that.
three. I know of three. I don't know of a fourth, but
I know there was Streisand
right, and
and
then
Gaga and then
and the original,
Garland.
what? Right, yeah. So that's the
Yeah.
only three I know of.
Um, so I think with each one of those, you have the same basic story, but you have new music or you have a new
Hmm.
spin on the issues. And so I think it's a fine line between just kind of relying on something that's already been done versus being able to make something new.
Well, how many times have we um, recreated Romeo and Juliet? You know,
Right.
and
Right.
and and there's some merit to that, because I've seen versions of it recently that have a male couple, which that gives it a whole new spin.
Right.
Or it's a timeless theme. The art itself actually becomes a theme more than it is just,
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's got that Romeo and Juliet vibe. But we saw West Side Story was basically a
And there's a new
setting.
West Side Story coming.
Yes, yes, there is. So then that becomes almost a theme, even though it was based on something else. But yeah, and I think that what we're talking about, and what was the original conversation, which I was part of and then relayed to you, was more a concern of, as I said, almost a laziness in literature, that And maybe I'm using the wrong word. Maybe it's a shift in focus from um,
From
quality
craft.
creation, from craft, quality craft and creation to um, writing or releasing or putting out or creating in whatever way, simply with the bottom line being your focus. You know, how much money can I make from this? And if I make
Right.
money from something, how many times can I um, duplicate that? You know, and
Well, and I think that I definitely think that, I mean, we definitely see that in writing. And I think like
mhm.
the movie example that jumps out of my head is The Hangover. The
Oh
first
yeah,
Hangover was hilarious, and it was original, and it wasn't like anything we'd had before, and it had all these, it pushed the boundaries, and it went across lines that hadn't been
hmm
crossed. And
yeah,
but then they did Hangover 2 and Hangover 3, where they tried to go like, okay, we're making a lot of money with this, let's take the same formula and just try to keep doing it.
yeah,
And I think we do see that in the writing community as well, of like, okay, this is what's selling right now, this is what's hot right now, so let's just keep putting out more and more of that.
yeah,
And the point could be made that there's nothing wrong with that, that if people want to buy
right,
it and they want to read it and they're getting joy out of it, then why not keep writing it? But it does offer the question of like, how does that, like, if we look back at this particular time period in culture, when someone else is a history teacher looking back,
right,
what are the books, the movies, the television, the music, what is representative of this time and stands out as being like, that's the that's the art that represented that period of time? Or
right.
is it really just like, are we concerned about that, or are we really just kind of pursuing streams and downloads and
Yeah, yeah.
sales?
And as we, in a sense, rid ourselves of the gatekeepers of culture, you know,
Hmm.
in publishing, which is what you and I are, you know, definitely most familiar with and is near and dearest to us. Um, when the indie publishing movement ignited, we saw a lot of hue and cry from the big five and editors and publishers in New York. They said, "Well, now it's just going to be all garbage. It's going to come out," and you know, clearly that is not true because here you and I are, and we don't put out garbage, right?
Of
And
course
we
not.
and we have both of us myriads of friends who also do not do that. Um, are there some books that hit the market that maybe are not as well crafted as they could have been? Absolutely. Would that have happened anyway in if the market had stayed? I say yeah. And I think on the other hand, we would have missed out on some really, really excellent reading and literature because somebody decided that it wasn't going to sell.
I definitely think opening up the gates the way indie publishing did, um, it has both its pros and cons. And I
Hmm.
think both can be summed up in one sentence of like, anybody can publish.
Right,
So that means that you're not limited to who happened to have their manuscript sitting on the right desk at the right time on the right day.
right.
But it also means that um, it puts the onus or the responsibility on each writer
Yeah.
to make sure that they are pursuing craft, that they're being, professional with their editing and proofreading, that they're trying to put out the best story they can put out, that they're
Hmm.
trying to explore character development and character arcs and imagery and things like that. And not everyone's concerned with that. There are some
No.
people who just want to write a story, and there's some people who just want to read a story, and they're not really that concerned with the craft and the development. So is that
Yeah.
okay? Like that, I mean, I guess that's the question, is like, does it matter if we don't have a Grapes of Wrath, or if we don't have I mean, because I look at like The Sound and the Fury
Oh,
is
yeah.
considered a classic. And to me, that is probably the single worst book I've ever read in my entire life. And I just, being from Mississippi, William Faulkner is kind of held up as some kind of literary god in the state. And I've never liked anything that Faulkner wrote. So
Right.
does it, does it really, does it matter? Does this really make a difference in our culture if we have people who, are trying to put out material of substance, or
Well,
does it matter?
I would say that you have to take a step backwards and look at what has been considered great literature, and with the caveat that sometimes a book, a movie, a painting is not appreciated until well after its introduction. I mean, we know that, like, I mean, this is a horrible example, but here it is. It's a Wonderful Life was released in the summer of the year that it was released, and everybody thought it was a flop. Well, yeah, it's a Christmas movie that you released in July, so yeah,
Right.
it's, and it took it coming to television for it to be, which happens frequently with Christmas movies, for it to become the classic that it is. But it really, and I would also venture to hypothesize that the other reason it became such a classic is because it was examining an epoch in time that we were long past and we could look back on with nostalgia. And I think that it's the same thing with a lot of everything else in art, is that sometimes things age better than
They're
they
better looking back
right,
than they
yeah,
are looking
exactly,
current.
yes, exactly. So taking that into mind, though, I look at some of the classics. Let's take A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, uh, To Kill a Mockingbird. I was thinking Finch. I was thinking Atticus Finch. I couldn't think of the name of it. To Kill a Mockingbird, and both of those books and a bunch of others are telling a story that the culture needs to hear, because it's maybe not being it may not be being told any way else, or there's something that we need to understand. We need to hear something that's going on, and it needs to represent a change that should be made, or something that we've gone through. And I cannot think, and I know, I'm sure people can come up, but I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that's come out in the last 5 to 10 years that would fit that bill as far as literarily.
But isn't it possible that it's come out and we just don't know about it?
Oh,
Like
absolutely,
because
absolutely. And that's my
I feel like
point.
there's
Yeah,
two different things. I
yeah,
feel like there's craft and then there's market. And you and I know
right,
there's a huge focus in pursuing market, or writing to
right,
market,
mm-hmm,
or studying the market, or jumping
right,
on trends in
right.
writing. But there are still people who are putting out what would you consider more literature.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
those just don't get the splash. They don't get the attention. They don't get shared as often. You know what I mean? Like,
Right,
and
right.
does that, I, I don't know, like, if it, does that make it a decline? Does that mean that it's not, that it doesn't have as much value? Like
No,
right now, like paranormal romance is really hot. Shifters are really hot. I don't think that 50 years from now we're going to be like, oh my gosh, let's all examine the dinosaur porn of, dinosaur shifter porn of of the 2000s. But at the same time, there is probably a novel being written somewhere by someone who we will be examining as like a sign of the times, or what you said, like a harbinger of change. My
right.
question, we've seen the decline of like the big traditional publishing industry, as indie publishing has become more popular, and as indie uh, publishing has kind of more saturated the market. We've seen a
Hmm.
lot of shifting with the traditional publishers. Will those people who are writing the books like To Kill a Mockingbird or Grapes of Wrath, or the what's the one with Heathcliff? Um,
Um, the Moors, Heathcliff, um, Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering, is it Wuthering Heights?
It is Wuthering Heights.
Things
Yeah.
like that, like, or even I would say like The Outsiders, S.E. Hinton,
Okay. Right. Hmm.
like books like that. If we don't have publishers, big publishers to push them,
Hmm.
And we know that those books don't do as well in the indie world. Do those books survive? Do those
Right.
books even, like,
Right.
become known?
Right. Well, the
And does
person,
that matter?
no, yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say that it does. The person who was bringing this up to me had pointed out that he does not think that indie publishing has yet. I believe what he was trying to say was that indie publishing has not reached the point yet where it can support a great literary fiction. That we're really great at genre fiction. We're great at romance. We're great at paranormal, mystery, whatever. It can support
Sci-fi,
all that.
fantasy.
Right, exactly. But can we support a book like, I mean, could you have, he brought up like The Martian. Okay, so The Martian, there you go. That I would say that that is a, yes, it's sci-fi, fantasy in a sense, but it's also literary fiction because it's about more than just um,
Right.
about a man on on Mars. And there's a couple more, but when I think about books that have come out in the last few years that I hear everybody talking about, that everybody says, "Have you read this?" Whatever. Delia Owens, "Where the Crawdads Sing." That is what pops into my head, and um, not indie. Um, would something like that have been supported or been able to be written in an indie market? I don't know. I don't know.
So how important is it? Like, because I think that obviously the reason that people write to market, or the reason that people write to trends, is because it sells. It
Right.
sells because people want to read it.
Exactly.
And so people enjoy reading it. So how important is it that we have these books of literary fiction if they're not as popular, if not as many people want to read those books, if not as many people appreciate those books? Are they important to our culture? Are they important um, to art and the survival of art? I mean, you mentioned that
Yeah.
those tend to be stories that, like, highlight a change that needs to be made, or that chronicle a time period, or that chronicle a specific experience. So how important is that
Well, I think it's
to
very,
culture?
yeah, I think it's very important. And I think we have to look at not only us as artists, but our audience and readers. We have both a responsibility to them, I think, um, not only to present our best stories and our best work, but also to do something that doesn't leave them. We don't dumb things down. I mean, I always want to challenge people to learn something or to find out something new, even if
And
they're
what if
reading
they
it.
don't want to learn?
Well, this is what we call people training, which sounds horrible, but it is true that if we don't offer it, people aren't going to know what they want. If you're feeding people, if all people have to eat are Swanson's frozen dinners, with all due respect to Swanson's frozen dinners, or Kraft macaroni and cheese, if that's all anybody has ever eaten, it's going to take them a while to realize that this made from scratch, really better for you, delicious, bubbly pan of baked macaroni and cheese is actually tastier. It's because it's almost two different dishes, and it's the same with
Right.
with books. I think is that if they're not exposed to it, they're not going to know. Will they? Is there room in the world for both Kraft macaroni and cheese out of a box and my delicious baked macaroni? Absolutely, absolutely. Because there are times that I just want to read before bed, and I do not want anything to challenge me, and I want it to be a romance
You
that
want
I can already
fluff.
tell you. Right. I
Yeah.
want it to be something that I know what's going to happen, so I'm not going to be surprised, and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm going to eat. I'm going to, this is good. I still want it to be well written. I still want it to be well crafted. However, I'm okay with that. But there are I know that if I do not pick up a book that I know
Challenges
is
you.
going to, yeah, stretch my mind and make me think about other things, then I'm doing myself a disservice. But people have to have the option, and we have to understand that it's important. This is why we teach literature in school, because most, and I'm saying most, I'm not making a generalization, but most 14 to 18-year-olds will not just go into the library and pick up Mark Twain or pick up Jane Eyre or pick up, any of the Bronte sisters or
Lord of the
John
Flies.
Steinbeck or, right, exactly. Any of the things that they really should be reading. For me, when
But
I was
why
home,
should they really be reading it? Because see, that's
right,
what I feel like that's kind of like, because of the time period that you and I were raised in,
right,
we feel like those are books they should know. Those are things they should be reading.
right.
But someone who's coming up today um, may not see the value in that, or may not see
And yeah,
why do they need to know how to dissect
I
poetry? Why do they
think
need to know,
I think it makes you less able to take part in a broader conversation than you otherwise could if you are completely ignorant. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean it in the purest sense of the word, completely ignorant of literature and history. Um, I'm passionate about both. I really am. And when I was homeschooling my kids, one of the things I did was have shelves that were filled with books that I wanted them to read before they were finished. And I never said, this is what you're going to read this week. It was there
right?
for them to just go pick up and read, but they knew that they had to always be reading a book from there. And they were varied. I didn't just have, I had things that I felt like they should read in order to take part in a larger conversation of culture, you know, not just the boring classics.
Right.
Um, you know, um, yeah, I don't know. I do think, do I have a definitive answer about why? Or, um, I think if we're not proactive about it, I think we're going to go the way of Rome. What saves me, or not saves me, but what encourages me, are that we are coming up with new ways to have conversations, even if it's not in a book. Um, I listen to podcasts, and this morning as I was getting ready, I was listening to Glennon Doyle, at her podcast with her sister and Abby, and I try to listen every week. They have 2 episodes a week. So, when you're not listening to us, they're a good second. But what they talk about and their discussions are things that we need to be talking about. And it might be there in literature, but maybe somebody else doesn't want to read it, but maybe they're going to hear it in a podcast, or maybe they're going to see it in a movie, or they're going to watch it on Netflix, or they're going to hear it in a rap song. I don't know. I think as long as we're getting it out there and as many different media forms as possible, I think there's still hope for us.
Well, I think it's a very interesting topic, because we know that, looking back at Rome, one of the issues was a decline in education, one of the issues
Right.
was a decline in culture. And I think there are people who will say that it doesn't matter if you read these classics. It doesn't matter if literary terms. It doesn't matter if you read, plain and simple. And then there are people who argue that, like you said, that this is part of a broader
Right.
conversation. It's part of a broader base of knowledge about the world and about life and things around
Mm-hmm.
you. So I don't know, that whole quote about, getting blindsided slowly. Like, I don't think there's like one thing where you can go, okay, there
No,
you go, we declined.
no.
I do think it's a gradual thing. And I don't know that reading The Grapes of Wrath is necessarily the key to
No.
being educated, or to being cultural, or to having some type of measure of health. But I do think that, what we consume and what we put out eventually kind of affects the overall mindset. Like, I look at, it could be said, and I'm not saying this because I've done scientific research, but it could be said that reality shows rose from the writers' strikes.
Right.
And when they had issues getting people to write stories, for television, episodic stories, and they were having all these issues with writer pay and all this other kind of stuff. And they kind of birthed these reality shows that, in the beginning, the concept was that they wouldn't be scripted. We won't even get into whether or not they're actually scripted today, but in the beginning, the concept was that they wouldn't be scripted. And so I just think there's little things like that where we lose culture and we lose art. And
Right.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, if you love the Housewives or you love The Bachelor or whatever. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, and definitely enjoy that, go all in on it. But how does that becoming our prevalent entertainment affect the overall culture when it's not something that's created with craft in mind? It's not something that's created with art in mind, or a particular message in mind.
Well, yeah, and I have very strong feelings about reality TV, and I think that if you only watch reality TV, then it's the equivalent of eating only gummy bears all the time. Gummy bears have their place; they should be enjoyed, but you gotta put a little protein, you gotta put little veggies, you gotta have a salad now and again.
You got to make it more well-rounded.
Yeah, and I truly do feel that reality TV is like that. And to me, we joke about the harbingers of the death of society and the death of culture and whatever, but there are a lot of people who would say that reality TV was that, um, was when we stopped caring about what we were putting on television. Um, I don't know. I I don't want to I don't want to offend anybody with that, but yeah, I do think that I am, again, I'm encouraged that we are not falling back into just that. We haven't lost all of our good, well-crafted shows. And by offering services like Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and Peacock and all the others, and what's the CBS one called? Oh, Paramount, which I had to just get so that I could watch the next season of Dora the Explorer, just to say. Um,
Well, while you've got it, make sure you watch Yellowstone.
Oh, okay. Um, you know, we what happened is that when the regular networks had kind of dropped the ball and were heading more towards straight reality programming, none of them did all of it, but they really were not presenting us overall with great content. Then we had the streaming services, and now that challenged the original networks to come back and offer some really good programming. There's things that we watch that are
Networks
on
and
CBS.
studios, like even the movie
Exactly,
studios, have been
absolutely.
challenged by the
Yep.
streaming services and their productions.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I don't think we're quite dead yet, but I do think it's important to have the conversation and to be aware of where we're going and to be, um, you know, to ask ourselves every now and again um, if we're making great money putting out the same story over and over again and just changing the names of the characters and the setting, what responsibility do we have to maybe take that take that you know the fact that we don't have to write the next book for money and write something that people really need to hear? I don't know. That falls into what is the responsibility of the artist
Right.
to the culture,
Right.
and
Well, and
yeah,
I
I think
think
that's another conversation.
indie publishing, online streaming have definitely knocked down the gates in many ways, where we see people who get recording contracts from a video on TikTok or from a video
Right.
on YouTube.
Right.
We see people who are able to get their books out there and literally sell thousands and sometimes millions of copies. So I don't have all the answers, surprisingly. But
I've
I
been
don't
lied
know.
to.
I don't know. I definitely think there's value in that. I think there's value in not having our talent and our representation limited to just what a few people in corporate offices decide they want it to be.
Definitely.
So I definitely think there's value in that. And obviously, you and I are both indie publishers, and so we benefit from
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do worry about what that means for the overall quality of culture and how that's reflected when we look back on this time period. Do we have those songs that emerge as classics? Do we have those books that emerge as classics? Do we have those movies that emerge as classics? Or do they kind of get lost in the sea of everything that's readily available? and just the sheer number of things that are readily available. I mean, I've seen different figures thrown around, but there are literally millions of new books put on Amazon, you know, constantly.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the sheer amount of songs that are there to consume, the sheer amount of books that are there to consume, and now with YouTube, you know, original content on there, does what would be considered classic or what would be considered culturally representative become lost in that? Or is all of it of value? Is all of it representative?
Yeah. And actually, the more that we talk about it, no, I
Yeah.
do. No, I think that just like when we first we're talking about this, and I was saying that, in the 50s, there was a whole generation of people who had come of age in the 30s and 40s who thought that the birth of rock and roll was the end of society as we knew it.
Elvis's
And
hips were on
yep,
decline.
Elvis's hips. There you go. We were all going straight down. And you look back and you realize, remember the dime store novels, it was basically pulp fiction,
Right.
the original term for it. So there's always been, at least to the best of my knowledge, there's always been that kind of underlying gummy bear literature or gummy bear fare music and whatever. I don't think we're not still. I think as long as we have artists who are passionate about art for the sake of art, I don't think we are in imminent danger in that format yet. Are we going to see things change? Possibly. I mean, how do your kids text? Do your kids text in full words and
No.
sentences and so on?
No, and even when I was teaching, like I struggle with that with essays
Mm-hmm.
because they write essays the same way that they write text, and have to talk to them like you can't put the letter R instead of the word R. You can't, put numbers.
Yeah.
But you see things like cursive,
That's
kids
true.
today who don't use cursive.
Yeah.
I would have kids who, especially when we were doing like standardized testing and they were supposed to sign their text booklet and they had no idea
Right.
how to
Right.
make a signature or how to make an autograph.
Right.
So I think that it's an interesting point that you raised of like, how much is our questioning this because of the age we've become?
Right.
And it's different now than the way it was when we were young. Like, how much of that is as each age comes along or each generation comes along, that the generations before them question the way they're doing things, and it's not the way we would have done it, so we're
Right.
declining.
Right.
So like, how much of that is like our age?
Yeah.
Because like I look at like my son is very much into like electronic music, and I
Mm-hmm.
know there are people who kind of feel like that's not valid music because he's not
Right.
playing an instrument, but he's still spending hours, perfecting these sounds and perfecting the melodies and putting together, the sounds at
Right.
the right time and the timing and things like that. So I don't know, like that's an interesting question of like, how much of this is not a decline at all? It's just a transformation or a progress,
Right.
but because your generation did it differently, you see it as somehow less
True.
than.
True. And I think that some of it, we won't know this check back in 30 years, maybe 50,
Right.
and we'll
Right.
see. We'll jump back on and we'll give our commentary. But like cursive you bring up, as a homeschooler, the homeschooling community in the past has been very passionate about keeping that because they believe that there's a mind hand connection
There
and
is.
so different
There
things.
is
Right.
scientifically.
But maybe as somebody who did not learn cursive, I missed it. I moved from California before they'd started teaching it. And by the time I arrived in my new school, they had already taught it. So, the difference between West Coast and East Coast really screwed me up. So I've never been really passionate about cursive handwriting. And yes, I taught my kids that, but I'll tell you, I write maybe twice a month now, like sit down and write a note or whatever. Most of everything I do is on my computer, on my phone, voice to text, asking my electronic helpers to do stuff for me, So we may see the decline of cursive handwriting. That may become something like, we look back at how spelling and words were spelled in the 1700s, where they used
Right.
S instead of S, and we go, oh, we would never do that. It could be that our grandchildren are going to go, well, why would I ever pick up a pen and
Right. Why would I
do
write
that?
out
Why
the
would I
whole word
do
when I could
that?
use a
Yeah,
letter? Well, I
exactly.
think that
Yeah,
I do think it's an interesting, like a broader question of how do you determine what's decline and what's progress?
exactly. That's a
Because
really good way to put
I
it.
I can remember I can remember so many teachers saying, well, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket, so you have to learn these math skills. And now everybody, carries a calculator in their pocket.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yep. And a word
so is
processor
that a
and yeah,
decline that
yeah,
if I go to a store and the cash register isn't working, that the cashier can't give me back my change because they can't add it themselves without the cash register
right.
telling them to? Is
Yeah,
that a decline or is that progress? Is that
yeah.
something that is knowledge that we no longer need to know? So there are some who would say that we're dumbing it down because of computers. People aren't learning their math skills, or they don't know how to, add and divide and multiply by themselves. Is that a decline, or is that something that we as a society no longer need to know because of computers?
Well, it's
So I
interesting
think with
too.
all of this, how do you determine what is
Yeah,
actually a decline where we're leading ourselves in the wrong direction, and what is actually progress where things are just changing and morphing and they're not what they used to
right.
be?
Exactly. And I think it's interesting because uh you have these movies that are like the zombie movies or the apocalypse movies where there is no electricity or there is no something, and you're seeing that the skills that the people have or don't have really affect them. So we are asking those questions, even if we're asking them in a different format. It's
Well, I
we
think
don't have answers.
no. Another layer of that is we kind of, as a society, somewhere along the line decided that everyone needed to go to college, and we kind of, as a
Hmm.
society and in schools and in homes, started pushing everyone to go to college. And then what happens with that is, like, now we have like a shortage of electricians and mechanics and plumbers and air conditioning repairmen and people who
Hmm.
have valid skills that we need in order to function as a society. But
Hmm.
we've kind of like not put a focus on that. So I don't know. God, these are all difficult questions. I mean, they're fun to discuss,
They really
but I
are.
don't feel like we
Yeah.
came up with any answers. We don't really have a guidebook that we're going to be passing out to
No.
everybody at the end of this.
No, no, I wish and maybe we're not meant to. Maybe some of the growth is found in the conversation and the journey,
And in
and
the questioning.
in the questioning. Yeah, I will say my children do text to me in full sentences because they know me and they know I will correct it. So
My
they will
child
do
texts in full sentences, and last night I was doing an ultraviolet chat. I was on a Zoom chat, and it was about a quarter till 10,
it. Hmm.
and my child called me, and my child's a texter. Like, he is of this generation that he
Right.
loathes being on the phone, so any
Hmm.
conversation we usually have is going to be texting. He usually doesn't call unless something's wrong. And the
Right.
fact that it was a quarter 10 at night, I'm kind of a little freaked out, and so I told the people in the Zoom chat I'm hosting, I apologize, but my child's calling me. I say my child, he's 23, but he's still my child. But my 23-year-old is calling me, and he doesn't call me unless there's something wrong. So I need to take this. And I answer the phone, and I'm like, hey, I'm in a Zoom chat. Can I call you back? Well, a few years ago, he called, and I was in a movie theater. And I
Right.
answered and very quietly said, hey, I'm in a movie theater. Can I call you back? And he was like, yeah. And after the movie, I called him back, and he'd been in a car accident. And I was
Oh
the first person he
no.
called, and I told him I was in a movie and I'd call him back. So last night when I said, can I call you back? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? When I write fast paced environment, there's supposed to be a hyphen between fast and paced, right? And so I started
Yes.
laughing, like,
Yeah.
obviously very relieved that nothing was wrong. But yeah, my child, who's been brought up with like grammar matters, was, very concerned about hyphen placement at a quarter to 10 at night. But
Good
I
for
don't know,
him.
for me, I think the answer is to make sure that we are exposing ourselves to a broad range of material.
Right.
Do I love Old Town Road in all its many versions, yes, I do, and I will dance to it. But I also love to hear the lyrics of, like an Adele, or the
Hmm.
lyrics of Taylor Swift, who some people would argue
Right.
is not good culture, but she's an incredible lyricist.
Oh,
I would love
exactly.
to hear like the lyrics of Manchester Orchestra, or some of these other people who just weave words in incredible ways.
Exactly.
Um, do I love me a good paranormal romance? Hell yeah. But do I also sometimes want to read something that really challenges me and makes me think, and
Yeah.
really makes me look at things from a different angle? Oh, because
Yeah.
that's another thing I was going to mention very quickly. Um, One of the things that those gates falling has done, when I was talking about representation, we now have representation in books from the LGBTQ community,
True.
and from
Hmm.
you know the Latina community, the Asian, like
Right.
all these different communities. We
Yeah.
have more representation of people of color. Definitely not
Hmm.
where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And I think
Right.
that that's another advantage when we look at culture from this time period, that we do have more representation.
Right. I agree.
Again, it's not equal, it's not where it should be,
No.
but it's more. So I don't know. I guess the answer that I come up with is that I need to put the responsibility on me as an artist to make sure that I'm trying to produce something that's good. But I
Hmm.
also need to put the responsibility on me as a consumer to make sure
Right.
that I'm seeking out those books, those songs, those movies, those television shows that may be not so mainstream, and getting a more well-rounded experience from it.
Definitely. Yeah. Eat a salad every now and again.
Eat a salad, listen to, some indie music, read an indie book,
Yep.
and watch
Absolutely.
indie films. I mean, that's one
Yeah.
thing. I do the Oscar Best Picture showcase every year, and
Hmm.
every year people are like, I've never heard of any of these films, which is true. They're not usually mainstream films, but
Right.
I think sometimes it's important to kind of step out of the branch of, I love me a good Marvel flick, but it's important to step
Yeah.
out of that branch and see some more, kind of more independent films that have a little bit different story.
Definitely. Different point of view.
So
Well, we're glad that you were here as we had this conversation, and the conversation will continue. So we hope that you will join us again when we pick it up. If you have anything to say about this, our topic, or anything that we talk about on on an open dialogue. Um,
did you just forget the name of our podcast?
no, 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 no. I'm sorry. I hear something in the background, and it
Is that
distracted
my
me. I
clock
did not.
chiming?
I believe it is your clock chiming. It's kind of got a good beat to it, and I was going to dance, but
That's
it's
like our time's up,
it
because when
is
we
the
started
time
at
is up.
11, I was like, oh my God, if
Oh
we're not
yeah.
done by 12, the
It's
clock's going
gonna
to
chime,
chime.
and it
So there
has.
you
So
go.
there we
Time's up.
go. We're Cinderella. If you enjoy what you hear on an open dialogue, please do leave us a review. Please do subscribe, follow us, and come talk to us on our Facebook page, which is an open dialogue. Yes, right.
Yep.
And or email us at an open dialogue1@gmail.com.
We would love to hear your opinion on all this. Like, is
We
this
would.
just crazy talk and people need to write whatever they want to write, sing whatever they want to sing? Or do we need some sort of balance in culture?
Yeah,
So let us know
definitely.
what you think.
Share with us, and we will talk to you again soon. You can find us both on social media and on our websites. Mine is tawdrakandle.com, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
TikTok.
And TikTok, yeah.
And
And you
mine is
are?
violethowe.com. I am on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, but you will never, hardly ever, ever, ever see me tweet anything. I'm on Instagram, and I'm on TikTok, kicking and screaming and trying to figure out what I'm doing. So
There
yeah,
you
join
go. You're
us.
good. Join us. Definitely do. We will talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.